Hello, I'm Ms. Fox. Hello, I'm Ms. Fox. Hello, I'm Ms. Fox, and today I wanted to talk about my voice. You may have noticed some changes in my speaking patterns, accent, and intonations over the past several videos, especially if you've gone back and watched some of my earlier work. This is due to the fact that I've been voice training. Some of the other trans women in the audience might find that a bit strange, as their voice training probably didn't result in this major of a change to their accent and pronunciation. In truth, I haven't been training on a traditional path because my goals weren't simply to feminize my voice. Yes, I have gone about intentionally adopting a new regional accent. No, I'm not trying to sound British, as you might have assumed. Instead, I've learned to adopt the transatlantic accent, something you may be familiar with if you've watched old American movies. The transatlantic accent is not quite English and not quite American. Rather, it's a little bit of both. There are many misconceptions about the accent, so I won't repeat them here. What you should know is it used to be quite common in Hollywood and the American upper class. It has fallen well out of favor, and so most people nowadays use it as a shorthand for outdated or old-timey speech. Reportedly, Pedro Pascal wanted to adopt the transatlantic accent in the recent Fantastic Four movie. If you've been following my Tumblr, you're probably not as surprised about this choice, but for the rest of you, you've probably got a couple questions. And so, for this video, I'm going to discuss why and how I adopted the transatlantic accent, as well as potentially answer if you should also voice train the way I did. Let's start on the why. The very short answer is, I'm an adult and I can do whatever I goddamn well please. But the longer answer is a bit more complicated and nuanced. I've been out as transgender for almost a decade now, and in that time my voice dysphoria has been small and intermittent. There have been times that I've felt self-conscious about my voice, but it was never a priority for me to do something about it. It's been a larger trend in my transition that I take things very slowly. I came out in 2016 and started dressing more feminine, but it wasn't until 2019 that I started considering hormone therapy, and from there it was another 3 years before I started taking it. So it really isn't that absurd that I'd wait this long to try any kind of voice therapy. You might remember from a previous video that before my transition, I had started putting on a Valley Girl accent as a bit, and was then haunted by that same voice which demanded I perform it seriously. I suppose then that it shouldn't be surprising that I've had a fascination with regional accents for a while. I did at one point consider if I should adopt the Valley Girl accent permanently, and I also once considered the archetypal New Yorker accent. So, more recently I came to the realization that the thing which would motivate me to commit to voice training would be to change my accent. On its face, this actually isn't as absurd as it sounds. People change their accents all the time, although not always for positive reasons. Some people feel that their accent stands out when moving from one area to another, and others in racialized minorities may adopt a more white person affectation to avoid mockery and suspicion. Trans people specifically may find that their accent shifts depending on their voice training resources. A lot of voice learning is auditory mimicry, so trans people may find themselves sounding more like their voice coaches. Or if they can't afford that, more like the VTuber whose videos they watch. So it's possible to do, and a lot of people do it, whether intentional or not. But still, I needed to pick the right accent, something that felt correct for me. Not only that, but as a white person, I needed to make sure that I'm not stepping on anyone's toes, culturally speaking. If I attempted to sound like a New Yorker, you might call me a poser, but if I tried to sound Latina, you'd be correct if you said I was being very racist. Valley Girl is a little overplayed. A lot of girls like me end up sounding that way, and I don't want to sound like a poser by putting on a New Yorker accent. I could always do what Robert Evans does and put on a perfect Bostonian affectation. A lot of my family come from the Midwest, so it wouldn't be out of place for me to sound like that. But unfortunately, none of these ideas are really sticking. Well, that story about Pedro Pascal had me intrigued, and I do like the occasional old Hollywood movie, so I did a little research. The transatlantic accent is functionally a dead accent, so I'm not coming in and appropriating anyone's culture here, and I definitely still sound white. It's also harder to call me a poser because who really cares if my early 20th century manner of speaking isn't fully period accurate? And if you're British and you say I'm a poser doing a bad British accent, I don't care. You're British, so your opinion automatically doesn't count. In adopting this new old accent, I've taken a lot greater interest in my voice, just like transition allowed me to take a greater interest in my clothing and hygiene. I feel a bit more refined and unique in my speaking patterns, and this new affectation may be more appropriate for the current period than you might have thought. It's the Roaring Twenties once again. We're talking about another Great Depression, and sadly, fascism seems to be coming back in vogue. I think I'm allowed to indulge in a little vocal joy. So that covers the why, but what about the how? My medical insurance does cover voice training as essential care, but accent training is not the same kind of vocal coaching as voice feminization, so there are a few things I did. Firstly, I did a bit of research into the differences between generic American speech and the transatlantic accent. There's some differences in vowel sounds, a large emphasis on ooh sounds, a noted lack of R coloring, and a hwa sound on most WH words like whip or what. I also looked into any resources on learning the accent, and a few sites pointed me in the direction of Edith Skinner's textbook from 1942, Speak with Distinction. This is considered the golden standard for transatlantic accent, what was then described by Ms. Skinner as good speech. Speak with Distinction has been preserved and reprinted several times as a stage speech handbook. You can find several used and archived versions online, and the most recent revision is available for purchase as an e-book. But I'm not a linguist, so a lot of the written description of language, and especially the symbology used to describe pronunciation, are functionally useless to me. You can throw all the diagrams and paragraphs you want at me, but I'm an auditory learner when it comes to language and accent. Coloring is a nonsense phrase to me, but it's made a lot easier to understand if I can simply hear the difference between fear and fear. So the thing which helped me most in my accent learning was to find a voice model, and my model just so happened to be Katharine Hepburn.
The time to make up your mind about people is never.
The time to make up your mind about people is never. Part of my voice training is listening to a video of edited together clips from one of Katharine Hepburn's movies. Hearing them and then repeating them back helps me to center my voice. It also gives me quite a collection of activation phrases.
You're so much thought and so little feeling, Professor.
You're so much thought and so little feeling, Professor. Obviously, I'm not going to sound exactly like Katharine Hepburn. That was never the goal. But by paying close attention to her speaking patterns, I'm able to develop my own voice. Through mimicry, I've learned how words should feel in my mouth when using the transatlantic accent, how much emphasis should be put on certain syllables, how to pronounce vowels, when the pronunciations are allowed to be inconsistent, and what it feels like to intentionally make my voice more nasally. But one 3-minute video doesn't make for a particularly intensive training regimen, and so this isn't the only resource I've wanted to use. Returning to Speak with Distinction, certain reprints of the textbook, notably in the 90s and early 2000s, came with practice booklets and audio CDs or cassettes. These audio practice materials had spoken examples of word pronunciation in good speech. If I could just get my hands on it, then surely that CD would be a boon to my efforts. Unfortunately, it was not so simple. The CD and cassette have been out of print for at least 2 decades now, and all the online listings I found for used copies came with the disclaimer that CDs or other supplementary materials were not guaranteed to come with the used textbook. The current listing for the most recent edition of Speak with Distinction makes no mention of any audio practice assets, and to be sure of that fact, I reached out to the publisher to ask if they had any audio files associated with the textbook. They responded and told me that they were not in possession of any supplementary audio materials for Speak with Distinction. This was not all that surprising to me. Speak with Distinction has been reprinted several times under different owners. I'm not sure who the original publishing company were, but the oldest I could find was Applause Theatre Book Publishers, a former imprint of Hal Leonard. Applause were acquired by Rowman and Littlefield Publishing, who were then acquired by Bloomsbury Publishing. It is extremely likely that the supplementary audio files only present in certain editions of this textbook were simply lost in the move. It's also possible that contracts pertaining to the original recordings of these materials do not apply to re-releases under the current publisher, and thus Bloomsbury would have to spend some money to either renegotiate the contracts or re-record the material, something large companies rarely like to do. So what is a girl like me supposed to do? Do I take a $40 gamble on a used textbook and simply hope they have the CD? Do I spend money on an accent training program? Do I simply double down on my black and white movie clips? These files weren't archived anywhere I could find, and while not lost media in the strictest sense, it is in the process of being lost. Some people still own this CD somewhere. Some colleges have it available for their theater department, and some collectors see some amount of value in this textbook. But it's a slim chance that I might encounter it in a used bookstore, and the fact of the matter is that these discs and tapes are decaying. Not everyone is good about preserving their media, and CD and cassette players have long since fallen out of fashion. It's only a matter of time before the discs become scratched and rotted beyond use. At a certain point, any of the few libraries which have it will probably destroy or cycle out their copy due to the age and condition of the material. But in this, I did find some hope. You see, some libraries still do have a copy of this CD and practice workbook. You can even see it on WorldCat. None of the libraries were within my local area, at least not any that weren't associated with a specific college. But there is a way to get library materials that aren't available in your area. Interlibrary loan is the process by which libraries share their books and other media across the country, and to be a public library means that you must participate in interlibrary loan. All I had to do was come to my local library, make sure my library card was up to date, and speak to the information desk about requesting an interlibrary loan. It cost me all of $3 to put in the request, and it would take up to 6 weeks to know if my request had been fulfilled. Filing a request does not make a guarantee, as an owning library has to be willing to loan out the copy. There are plenty of reasons they might not be, including popularity of the material in their area or fragility of their existing copy. I've read that libraries are usually less willing to do an interlibrary loan for discs and other non-book media. So I waited, and about 2 weeks later, I got an email letting me know that my request had been delivered. I walked down to the library, found my loan on the shelf, and then checked it out. The CD was in a condition that had me a little worried. It had plenty of visible scratching, including what looked to be a pretty nasty circular scratch or stain. But this was my best shot at finally getting to see these materials, so I cleaned up the disc and put it into my computer and...
Practice Session 1. Marijuana, cuckold, bosom, moron, come.
To my surprise, the disc played just fine. I got to work on ripping the files from the disc since I would at some point have to return it. I also put up a little bit of money to make some high-resolution scans of the practice book since that had not been archived online either. And now I have my very own archival copies of the material. Now that it's in my hands, I do need to say that it wasn't exactly what I expected. This material was recorded, as best as I can tell, in 1990, which would be almost 50 years after the book was written. Comparing the practice material to old movies, there's a clear difference that time has made in how people pronounce the same words and the emphasis they make. Still, it's not useless. There are still plenty of exercises that will help in learning the transatlantic accent, particularly the ones which focus on R coloring. I would say it's a good part of a well-rounded learning routine, something to be combined with clips of your favorite transatlantic movie actor. There's a lot of words and phrases that will help you get a feel for certain sounds, and the final session includes a lot of tongue-twister phrases to really test your ability. Or at least, it would be a useful practice tool if only someone had gone through the trouble of preserving these files online for others to view and learn from. Archival work really is important to education and preservation of knowledge, so it's a shame I was never able to find uploads of these materials online. On a completely unrelated note, did you know that I have a website? Yes, it's true. If you go onto your computer, or more likely your phone, you can type msfox.online into your web browser right now to see my very own special website. It's got links to my social media, my Ko-Fi and merch store, and this very YouTube channel, as well as a tab for seeing my recommended playlists and most recent uploads. There may even be some other surprises for you to see. In addition to consulting Speak with Distinction and old movies, this greater interest in my voice has gotten me to commit to voice feminization training. My insurance provider actually covers voice therapy as part of my transition plan, and so after a few weeks of doing my independent study of the transatlantic accent, I talked to my endocrinologist about getting a referral. I spoke to my voice coach about my goals and laid out plainly what I believe they would be able to help with versus what I would have to do on my own. They gave me tools for analyzing my voice and a packet for guided exercises to help bring my voice to a higher pitch. This is, unfortunately, not something that everyone will be able to replicate. Your coverage will vary depending on your insurance provider's views on transgender care, if you even have insurance to begin with. I have seen online resources for voice training like various YouTube videos and channels, so you may have to look around to see what free resources you have available. So, we've learned the why and the how, and that just leaves the question of if you should learn the transatlantic accent as well. This is, of course, not a decision I can make for you. Only you can decide if this is the right path. If it sounds like fun, maybe a nice parlor trick to pull out at parties, I think that's a good enough reason. If you're an actor looking to expand your range for period pieces, this may also be a worthwhile exercise. And if you're like me, someone looking to explore their voice and find a new affectation for daily speech that doesn't make you sound like a racist, you may find that this is just the right jumping off point. If it gets you to more seriously commit to your voice training efforts, even if you end up not sticking with the transatlantic accent, then it's a worthwhile exploration. My one bit of advice to all would-be accent learners and voice trainers is that you need to accept that you will sound bad at the start. Voice training is a slow process, no matter what kind of voice is being trained. And so your ears are going to adjust to your new voice at the same time as your mouth and throat are adjusting to producing it. You are going to be bad at it because no one is instantly an expert in any new skills they pick up. Voice training requires commitment that can weather the awkward stages. One of the most difficult things for me was learning to keep my voice when my focus was split. It's easy to repeat a few phrases that you've practiced, but it's much harder to maintain when you're reading off of a script and analyzing your own performance at the same time. You will have to practice, which means talking a lot. It does not have to be as publicly as I'm doing over a YouTube channel, but you still need to talk. Talking is the only way to train a voice. With all of that said, this is where my video ends. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about my voice training journey. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll return for the next video. Until then, I leave you with these parting words. Heat from fire, fire from heat, none can sever. Farewell. You seem quite contemptuous of me all of a sudden.